Well, folks, it's early, but we're starting to see what may be the Trump economy. And if you're a business owner, if you're a business leader, if you're looking to the future of business, if you're maybe thinking what your retirement might look like or how your career might pan out today, we're going to be digging into the Trump economy. I'm Shawn McBride. I'm a business lawyer by training. This channel is not about business law, it's about the future of business. I bring those lessons from my interactions in the business world, from my reading, from my years of experience, from my studies as a CPA, and from my deep economic analysis that I do as part of my career in life. I bring and package it all together here about the future of business. And today we're going to be thinking about that Trump economy and where we are today, where we might be headed, and what it might mean. Trump has jumped onto the scene, and the number of executive orders is impressive, right? He spent part of the day yesterday just signing things at different meetings and different events, moved through several signing ceremonies because he really wanted to jump on top of reforming and pushing things as the commander-in-chief and as the president of the executive office of the United States. Now, what I think is going to be fascinating and what's coming already has started is legal challenges to those executive orders. The U.S. has become a country that is largely about the presidential politics, right? And now we see here in 2025 that pushing of the direction of the government has become a very big factor in what happens and what doesn't happen in the U.S., right? And Trump is putting his finger on a scale, moving things a completely different direction. There will obviously be legislative priorities coming. There's going to be announcements about legislation that may be coming in the future. So all of that's still in the works. But what we're seeing is a very big piece of this is what direction does the president want to take us, right? And through executive orders. So from reading his various executive orders and from being prepared for what happened on Inauguration Day, many of the events were not a surprise to me because they were all telegraphed in advance, but they all have impacts on the future of business, which is what we want to unpack together today and really make sure we have a good handle on. All right, so some of the stuff is more economic in nature. Some of it's military in nature. What I find interesting is the amount of focus on the economic side of things. Obviously, Trump, being a businessman, thinks in terms of expanding the U.S. economy. Bigger U.S. economy obviously means more power for the U.S. in international affairs, means that military can continue to be large and can continue to place its finger on the scale internationally. So I think that was a big theme of what we saw here, was trying to shore up U.S. industry and try to make sure that things are stronger at home going forward. And you can see that in the executive orders that are coming through with respect to, potential tariffs, with respect to energy. And those types of activities are really going to bring potentially manufacturing back to the U.S. We've already got major companies talking about potentially reshoring manufacturing activities, activities that had moved out of the U.S. or being done by multinational conglomerates. They're now looking at potentially doing the manufacturing in the U.S. to avoid the tariffs, right? In his press conference when he was doing the signings late at night, Trump was talking with the reporters, going back and forth, and he was saying, hey, we want to encourage companies to move their manufacturing into the U.S., right? So he really has this vision that stuff is going to be happening in the U.S. He also talked a lot about using U.S. energy, not only in the U.S. economy, but exporting it, right? So he's viewing that there is so much energy in the U.S. that not only can it be tapped and used as a support of the U.S. economy, but also used to export and potentially bring money into the U.S. economy that way, right? So he's really thinking in those terms. Will this bring inflation down? I personally think it may. Energy is a core component of so many things, right? Almost everything that is tangible has energy in the manufacturing process, right? Whether it's shipping the goods from point A to point B, whether it's the actual, making of the products, the components, the plastics, All of that not only requires energy, but many of those are petroleum products in themselves. So bringing energy costs down, in my opinion, will bring the inflation issue into focus and potentially start to lower prices. If there's cheap energy, if things can be transported cheaply, if you can buy the materials that you need for projects more inexpensively, suddenly now there is a downward item in the economy, right? And if we want to zoom back and think about economic growth and prosperity, it comes from the creation of things, right? And you can get economic expansion a few ways. One way is through innovation, right? If you can just suddenly do things you couldn't do before, you're creating more value. That creates economic expansion. That's one of the reasons the U.S. economy's done so well. But another way you can have economic expansion is to remove costs, right? And we think about innovation as being new products or being new items brought to market or new technologies. But what if you can innovate and get more of what you have for less? That is essentially what he's attempting to do with the energy prices. So I personally see this spiraling forward. Now, I watch Mineko64's YouTube channel a lot. Comment below, let me know if you watch him as well. I mean, I think he's fantastic. He's lived throughout the world in various different countries, and he has his views on the economy, particularly gold and silver. But he thinks that energy is a side effect of inflation, whereas now Trump is going to put downward pressure on energy prices if these policies work. And my view is it's not that energy is going up because of inflation. Inflation is partially happening not only because of money printing, but because of these high energy costs and these energy policies. So now we can potentially unlock a cycle of positive cost reductions in core products, right? It's going to hit everything from grocery stores to stuff getting shipped there, to stuff being processed in plants, the farms that are using energy in making the agricultural goods, whether it's the livestock or the feeding of the livestock, right? There's all energy in everything you touch. And so this is going to really bring that downward pressure. Greenland was an interesting piece of the discussion, right? And now he's viewing Greenland as potentially being a military or security aspect to the U.S. And, talking to those reporters last night, it seems that Trump has a lot more realistic view on Greenland and its future than many people wouldn't think, right? He talked about how it's already got Russian and Chinese ships going around, and he talked about how he didn't think Denmark could really keep it in a leadership position, but the U.S. could. So he's really going in with a fundamental reason for making a transaction, right? And in my experience in my law firm side of life, I realize that people do mergers, people do acquisitions, people do transactions when there's a reason that brings them together, joint ventures, partnerships. One of the key things to getting a deal done is when there's an alignment of purposes, when both sides see a reason for doing that. So now he's really explaining the reasons why a Greenland deal makes sense. Now he's got to get everybody to back off from that recoil of reaction to him talking about taking over land and adding these other pieces to the U.S. But if you can get away from that initial shock, there are real reasons why a deal would want to happen, right? And this may be tied into a continuation of NATO or other things, right? You can see a lot of possibilities here. Does Denmark give up control of Greenland in exchange for some type of continuation of the U.S. involvement in NATO, right? Trump has famously talked about wanting to get out of NATO, but maybe it's revised, maybe it's changed, maybe the U.S. Continues to participate in some form or fashion in NATO in exchange for a land trade, right? And that then obviously adds security to Europe and to Denmark in exchange for giving up something they really can't secure anyway. Very fascinating to watch, right? So there is some logic to it. Now, one thing I did notice is Trump's knowledge of BRICS is somewhat weak, right? He thinks that Spain is part of BRICS. And that news conference where he's talking with the reporters, at some point he mentioned a couple of times that Spain was part of BRICS. He also mentioned that BRICS was 7 countries. And BRICS has gotten much larger than that. So I think he understands the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. He thinks South Africa apparently is Spain, or the S stands for Spain, or somehow Spain is one of the countries. And he also thinks BRICS is only 7 countries, even though they brought many other members in. That knowledge gap is something hopefully his advisors are going to help him with, because BRICS much bigger and covers a lot more of the planet than that. So that's very concerning to see. But hopefully that knowledge gap gets closed and we're moving forward. But Trump is really trying to pump the U.S. economy up. I think he sees a vision here. He sees lower energy prices connecting to everything. And then that will hopefully fix inflation. Also bringing manufacturing back in the U.S. All those executive orders really are pushing in a single direction here, which should be fascinating. For you and me, this may mean some revigoration, right? For all of our businesses that are kind of service providers to other businesses, which is largely what my law firm is. My consulting arm, this side of my business, giving speeches, talking to people about their business plans, helping people really move ahead, right? All of this is driven by general economic activity. And the more general economic activity we can get into all sectors of the economy, the better all of us are going to do. So I'm hopeful from that aspect. And maybe there's some method to some of his international stuff. He's still got some crazy wars to straighten out, some big stuff happening. But it looks like we're in a direction. What do you think? What questions do you have about Trump, the future of business? What are you seeing? Join me in the comments. Let me know. I look forward to reading your comments down there, maybe chatting back and forth with you. And if you have inspiration for future videos, let me know. Speaking of other videos, we got a whole library of videos here on the channel. Why don't you go check some out? Give me comments over there and give me ideas for future videos. I'll see you all for another video in the near future.